All right, welcome everyone to this little lightning talk together with Rudolf, who is a recent entrant to the DevAC cohort in London with Matt Clifford and Entrepreneur First. He is also quite an accomplished researcher, I'd say. He has at least published multiple papers that and presented those at conferences within technical AI safety research. And now we'll hear from him as he'll introduce to us like what it's about, this whole AI safety startup deal. Uh, so give it away
Yeah.
for Rudolph.
Cool. So basically, the title of my talk is: So you want to do an AI safety startup? Which I guess is what this hackathon is supposed to be about. So hopefully, it's a relevant topic. So I guess the goal here is that we need to somehow figure out how we get the world from where it is right now to a world with super intelligence and it's all goes safely and well, and we not all die or whatever. Key point is that this requires influence in the world in some way. So now, to start with, I will present my general oversimplified model for what levers exist for influencing the world. So, one of the most obvious ways to influence the world is, you find answers to questions. This is at least this is obvious if you are a researcher, which I guess many people in the audience in some ways are. So basically, the theory of change here is that there are questions that would be useful to know the answer to, and you go and find the answer to them. Another way to influence the world is to use force or implicit force. You just force people to do the thing that you want them to do. These days, of course, a lot of force is gated behind. You need to persuade people. You persuade the government, which has a monopoly on force, to do something. And another lever, even if it's not to persuade government, is just persuade people, communicate things. And the theory of change here is that you can persuade or communicate people. You can persuade or communicate people to do things you learn. There's something that they haven't heard yet, but if they will hear, they will do the thing that pushes the world in a good direction. And finally, there is building things. So you go out, you build products, you make things, you do useful things, you start companies, and so on. And the general classification looks like this. So finding answers to questions, this is research. This, for instance, I'm inventing the idea of AI safety via debate, before which the question, what is better than RLA chef, did not have an answer. There's things like policy, which is basically about trying to persuade and communicate people in government who control the government's monopoly on force to do something. And then there's building things, so entrepreneurship. And if you think about what AI safety is currently doing, a lot of it is, there's a very strong research pipeline. There's increasingly a lot of people trying to work in policy to push it forward. And there's a few entrepreneurial things going on, for example, apart research, but not all that much. So therefore, one thesis that I have is that building things is neglected within AI safety. So out of these three levers of influence in the world, research, policy, and entrepreneurship, I think AI safety is currently doing the least entrepreneurship. Now to take an example idea, let's make this concrete. What is one thing you could build? One thing you could build is you could be okay, evaluating LLMs is important. This clearly helps for safety. Let's start an organization doing LLM evaluations. So this was, Meter did this. Then a bunch of other people did this as well. You might be okay, well, if there's a lot of people already doing this, maybe I'll start an organization building tooling that helps people do LLM evaluations. That already exists too. And you might be okay, what if we use the AI to make the AI evals? And guess what? That also exists. So this brings me to a key point, which is that to find the good startup ideas, ideas that people are, the benefit of entrepreneurship is doing something new. And find the best entrepreneurial ideas. You should not look at what already exists. So for a lot of ideas, there is for instance, the LLM evaluations idea, at some point it was either impossible and or pointless. In this case, more pointless because LLMs were not interesting enough to be to be interesting to evaluate at some point. Then at some point there was a time when this idea was it was started to be possible and useful, but only a few people realized it, and the first movers came in and started a bunch of orgs doing this. And now is, I would say, unless you have some specific niche, which a lot of the organizations of the previous do in fact have, then it's very much on the side of this is an obvious idea. And I think there's this thing where a lot of people, when they first start thinking about startup ideas, they think of okay, what startups exist? And then they try to build stuff that does what these already existing startups do. And I think you should avoid that impulse. So one way, standard diagram that you see, I think this may be originally from Paul Graham, is that good startup ideas are an intersection of things that seem like a bad idea, but actually is still a good idea. So I would encourage you to be very contrarian and go for the things don't ask yourself how do I build Meter version 5? It's ask yourselves What is the idea that is like 2024 as like Meter was like I guess early 2023 or whenever they got started. And then I'm going to talk about some like the different like attitudes that you can use for generating ideas. So one is basically what I've just been talking about, like what is approaching, like what are the ideas that today are at the stage of like it's almost possible to do them, but like previously it wasn't, and like very few people like currently realize that it is currently like it is possible or almost possible to do this. Another idea or like another attitude is like focus on like what are contrarian beliefs that you hold. So there's a like yeah, so like in particular, because going back to the idea of like to have the good ideas first, like you need to disagree with a lot of people in order to like find the good idea first, and therefore you want to think about like what are the things that I believe. Like if everyone else is doing like okay, like we're gonna evaluate LLM agents or something. Like if this is for instance one idea, like what do you believe that is contrary to this? Do you think, for instance, that actually agency is overrated? We are not going to get agents because we don't need agents, or do you think that actually like we're not going to get LLMs because all the models will be like primarily vision based soon or something? You like what is the like specific belief you have that you think you are right about that everyone else is wrong about? And I will say that for both of these two, I think just being in AI safety is a massive advantage. A lot of the world is still stuck on questions like, are LLMs useful at all? Or how do we do like RAG for AI chatbots on like websites? Whereas if you've engaged in AI safety, you have spent hours reading the thoughts of some of the smartest people in the world on what happens when you get super intelligence. So in this sense, I think you should use your, like this is an advantage that AI safety gives you, is that you are ahead of the curve on realizing how big of a deal AI is going to be. Another idea is like, who do you want to serve? A company exists because it builds something that its customers want to buy. And like the way you do a company is that you make something that people want, as the classic phrase goes. So, especially when you're like trying to start companies that like are impacting a specific direction, one way to generate good ideas is that like, okay, whose problems do I want to solve? What are some actors I want to empower? Do you want to empower safety teams at like AI labs? Do you want to empower like Western militaries to not be like caught by surprise by AI developments? Do you want to like empower individuals to like not lose their economic value as AI advances? And then you want to dig really deep into what exactly are the problems that your like chosen customer segment has, and like try to invent a solution that no one, like people have not yet actually managed to do there. Another attitude, especially if you have like some deep technical background already, is just think about like what technologies are you an expert at that could be commercialized. And like in particular, if you have some unfair advantage. So there's a brilliant quote from, I think it was the CEO of American Insurance Group, who once said that all I've wanted in life is an unfair advantage. And if you're starting a company, you're like, or if you're trying to do something entrepreneurial, you're very much like, you are going to be the like small player fighting against a lot of like large established players. You want an unfair advantage. One of those is just be very good at some technology. There are others as well. Then there's also like, especially if you're doing impact-oriented stuff, so there's a lot of stuff that is done by for-profits, a lot of stuff that are good ideas that people don't do because the incentives aren't like good enough to do them. So as like a more altruistic person, you might be willing to start a nonprofit. You might consider like what are specific ideas in that space that other people aren't thinking of. And then finally, it's just like what sucks. Like often the like way to realize that something should be better is that you're like interacting the world, you're like seeing things happening in the world, and you're like, that really just does suck, right? I want to like fix this problem, make it better. Like what are the problems that you seem like weirdly bad in the world, where it's like the world is being like insanely incompetent at like accomplishing those things, and how do you solve that? So here are some attitudes. Now I'm gonna do a dangerous thing here. I'm gonna actually go and like very quickly list some ideas that I've just like randomly thought of. Where I hope the main effect of this is like persuade you that actually there are ideas that are like maybe not already existing. So like one is just like do insurance for AI products. In order to do this, you need to like price the like risk from AI, which means you have a business incentive to understand AI risks well, and then also. Yeah, it seemed like a very like naturally incentive aligned thing to do. Another idea is like, can you somehow commercialize AI debate, which I think is a great idea to like help help concretely in some case where like you need to make some tricky judgment calls where like current AI techniques aren't good enough, and the process like get better at this like potentially crucial line of technology. Another idea is like, okay, the biosecurity people have their like wastewater observatories where they try to like detect pathogens before they become like large. What would be an example of like if you wanted to monitor AI in the real world? Could you somehow do something, maybe non-profit, where like you just gather a lot of evidence on how exactly AI is like being used in the real world and what it's doing, and try to like catch things like if an AI agent went rogue or on the internet or something? Could you like detect that as early as possible? Um, Membership inference. Means figuring out whether a model was trained on a particular text or a particular data point. There are various people from like newspapers that are trying to sue OpenAI to like people who are just interested if ChatGPT has read their blog. You might be interested in like if you could make this reliable tool, or like ask the question of has this model been trained on this text. There's an idea of like trying to figure out how to assess all arguments in the same way that like Grammarly will draw a red squiggly line under text if it's like bad grammar. Can you do the same where like you like automatically point out problems in like text about like whether the arguments make sense? There's the idea that like with AI, you for the first time have agents that are like intelligent but also do not have memory. And can you use this, for instance, to like you can imagine that like for instance AI safety research is being slowed down by the fact that people have info hazards and they can't share them. But like maybe sometimes you can have like you can like tell the info hazards to an AI who then like knows the info hazards and like matches people who have discovered the same info hazard to work together. Or maybe you can do something where like AIs are used for secret negotiations where neither party wants to reveal the information, but they can make a deal based on the fact that they are comfortable revealing the information to like a stateless AI. Then also just like one like very specific one, Intelligence Rising is a scenario planning game run by some AI safety people to try to like show people what sort of futures and like what sort of like strategy decisions countries and companies might face with AI developments. And well, currently it's pretty expensive because you need to get a bunch of like experts in the room and like it takes hours at a time. Guess what? We can use the power of artificial intelligence to make that cheaper. And yeah, then maybe also to talk about like some ways of thinking about impacts versus other incentives. This is a thing that people often worry about when starting companies for altruistic reasons. And I think there's a mindset that is very easy to have, which is that like if you're doing something that is non-profit, you are in this like magical land of like perfectly aligned incentives. But when the instant you like start making money, this is somehow like you're like corrupted and you're dealing with like much worse incentive systems. I think this is like somewhat overstated. I think like any field that you will work in has messed up incentives, whether it's because like whether it's profit incentives or like publish to perish or like various weird stuff in like policy. So I think like there are bad incentives, but it's not like necessarily like massively more bad incentives than in other fields where you might want to have an impact. There are some like obvious things like if people are paying you money, they probably care about the product that you're making. Then also like if you make money, you can donate that to charity and do like a lot of good. There's also some like general argument for like there are going to be a bunch of important AI companies, a bunch of important AI institutions. It sure would be good if the people in charge of them were like sensible, impact-oriented people who did what was good for the world. I think though that like the main lens through which I would think about how to have an impact through an AI startup is the idea of differential progress, which I think is originally a Nick Bostrom term, which basically means that like there are like the order in which technologies are developed is not random. You can imagine a world where we got nuclear power before we got nuclear weapons, and that world might be a lot better. You can imagine a world where we like really pushed missile defense, and then we maybe have like missile defense before like that is like against ICBMs before we get nuclear weapons. And like that world again is like a safer world than the world we live in now, and could have been done maybe by people like really pushing on a tech and making like some techs advance much faster than others. And it's the idea that like we can affect the order in which we discover things, even if eventually there's some sort of like technological completionism maybe. And if we just like make sure that we're like outpacing the like dangers by developing like a defensive technology or like a beneficial technology or like risk mitigation technology, and I think that is like really compelling theory for how you have an impact by doing stuff. And this is also the like somewhat the like thesis behind EF's DefAC program, which stands for Defense Acceleration, which I assume they call it that because DefProg sounds too lame. But yeah. Yeah, that's basically the talk. I put the ideas up here in case it helps your brainstorming. If you want to talk to me about these ideas originally, you can scan this QR code or you can go to the contact page on my blog, which has a Google form that you can submit. Now, I think we have a few minutes left, so I can take a few questions if people have questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rudolf. Let's give a little round of applause with either your muted or unmuted mics. Thank you. The super great thoughts in general. Are there anyone who has some good questions for Rudolf to answer? Otherwise, I might start us off as well and ask, what is your perspective on how impact startups in AI safety relate to other fields? So, for example, you might think of climate change, tech startups that are trying to have an impact on carbon capture technologies, and is that something we should learn from, or is that something we are in a completely different situation compared to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Not something I've thought about much. I don't know super much about climate tech or like clean tech stuff. I do think there's something interesting about the fact that so I think in Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 book he mentions that a lot of like clean tech companies had like very ambiguous visions. They were just like, we're doing clean tech and this is good because it's clean. And then there wasn't a story. There was a story for the impact, but there wasn't a story for how they like win as companies, or why it makes sense for them in particular to do this thing. Versus then if you look at like Tesla, for example, which has like actually done something like really big, like pushed electric cars a lot. They had a very specific vision. In addition to having the impact vision, they had like a very clear product vision. And like maybe I think there's some lesson there in like being specific and being concrete. And like if you're going to do a for-profit, you need a product vision in addition to your like impact vision. I think there's also something interesting in so if you look at what's happening in solar power, which is basically that like it seems like the things that made a lot of difference were like German government subsidies early on, and then just like then sort of the like I'm not sure if any particular solar manufacturer was that like a differentially important. It was kind of like, once the solar power cost curve started going down, you just get like more and more solar power companies. There's like a pretty efficient market there. Right now, in particular in China, there's just like red hot competition in the like photovoltaics. Production chain, and I think like if at some point in like 2015 you had been like, okay, I'm gonna like start manufacturing solar panels, like probably you would have just like not had that much counterfactual impact because a bunch of other people would already have done this. It's a very like a commoditized market. So like again, I think this is like an argument in favor of like think about the counterfactual impact and think about the like specific story for why like what you are doing is like both has the like impact and the product and the like counterfactual like element to it, and not just like is like a generic thing that is associated with the things that feel good or feel impactful.
Nice. Yeah, definitely also a big vision for the hackathon for people to develop technical solutions that are not incentivized naturally by the markets, or indeed are pushing a completely new path, which I think will be super valuable. Lucas, you have a question.
Yes, thanks for the talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, cool. In the last part of the presentation, you like gave some examples of where like the attack came before the defense. Was your point that it's always like that, or like is there like some way that we can like change that order?
Yeah, so my point was that like I don't think this is a law of nature. I do think it is like often there is a thing that like destroying things is easier than like defending things. But like I think like specifically, I think the world where before we get nuclear weapons, we have both nuclear power and like ICBM defense would be like a much safer world probably. And like therefore like I think in particular this argument for don't accept that like technology should just show up at some like predetermined time. Try to make the good technology show up before the dangerous technologies, and that is like a key way how you can make a difference.
Super interesting. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, in that context, I'd be curious. Oh yeah, go ahead, Cyber.
Yes.
Cyber JJ.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm JJ. You can just call me JJ. Yeah, hi Rudolph. Thank you for the great chat. I have a curious question about finding co-founders. So
Yep.
a bit of context. I'm an undergraduate right now, and I'm in an Asian country, and I reckon there are some characteristics where people tend to be more conservative, as in towards risk taking. So like a stable career is often preferred, and it's hard to find people who are willing to go all in a venture. And yeah, just curious if you have any thoughts on how to find a co-founder, because I have tried certain things in the past, but to be very promising so far. Thank you.
Yep, these make sense. I think finding a co-founder is probably the hardest part. in the sense that like I think it's pretty important to have a co-founder, and like the like bar is pretty high for co-founders, and just like there are quite few people who fit that profile. So for example, like I studied at Cambridge, and a lot of people I knew were like very much they were going into like quant finance in particular. And I think like in general there is this thing where yeah, it is true that stable high earning careers tend to like suck people out of doing things that are more insane than that. I think there are things just like I think just like there's something where if you like meet someone who is like on the more agentic or entrepreneurial side, and like probably they have friends who are like also more than that direction, and you should like sort of like chain your way through like social networks towards more how should I put this, insane types of people, and then like that isn't one way. There's also like specifically like Y Combinator has like YC co-founder matching, where you can try to like meet people who like it's basically like Tinder for entrepreneurs, where like people have their profiles, they write about what they want in a co-founder, they write about what they're interested in. That's like one specific thing you can do, and like mainly just also just like if you do cool things, then eventually you will meet people who also do cool things. That those would be my main comments there.
Yeah, I think especially the last part. You'll naturally attract some really awesome folks that match what you're accepting into the world. So putting on YouTube or putting it as websites or something like this. Nice. Thank you. Any other questions coming up here? Otherwise, I think we might go to the last question.
I have one question. So founders is of course super important, but also funding is a topic that always comes up. And I'm curious about your view on this. So how easy or hard is it to get funding within AI safety if you do a startup in that area compared to, maybe general AI or tech startups? So are funders ready, and do they, is it quite feasible to get money, or do you see challenges specifically in that niche?
So I think this depends a lot on whether you're doing a for-profit or a non-profit. I think like in general, non-profit funding like is hard, and also like I think like non-profit funding to some extent like even gets like harder when you want to like scale beyond a certain size. And like I think like funding in general in the AI safety space maybe like somewhat tight right now, though like I'm not exactly sure about this. I think if you're doing a for-profit, it is much easier. If you're doing a for-profit, you should just go to like VCs instead of trying to get funding from like AI safety spaces, because like, why use AI safety funding if VC funding will, give you a lot of money. I think so like there is a bit of a like AI hype train going on, and like VCs have a lot of FOMO, so they will tend to like be very willing to like dump money on things. If you have like a credible pitch. I think in general, like the fact like VCs being a positive force in the world because they're willing to back like insane stuff at an early stage is I think like a somewhat underrated point. And like yeah, so like I think like for for-profit AI startups, I would like be like somewhat optimistic that you can get VCs if you have like in particular if you have some story for like we are already making money because we have customers or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, got it.
I think also just getting to a stage where you can pitch your idea, because a lot of these AI safety projects might be a case where you can't get a customer within the next six months. But if you're able to pitch the narrative of how it becomes commercializable in 2 years or so, and you're like, okay, in 2 years, like this will be a massive problem. You already see some parts of that, and it harkens a bit back to Rudolf's slide there on the differences between 22, 23, and 24 on evaluations companies. If you can predict that and make the story good, then it does work. I think.
I will also mention that like VCs, of course, like their job is to listen to pitches from founders. So in a sense, like VCs have like heard a lot of ideas already, and like one like the like a good way to stand out there is just like have an idea that like is like maybe not like unique, but like at least like is rare and like also like has actual promise, and like therefore VCs will probably be much more interested if you have an idea that's like more contrarian than the average idea that they encounter, which is probably like, I don't know, can be like tens of ideas per day from like people who are trying to pitch them. So like again, just like being like really having like a specific contrarian idea, trying to be like, I think there's a lot of like, I think like being ambitious with the ideas that you're having is like, I think an underrated point.
Yeah. I think the usual Matt Clifford mentioned that he always asks European founders specifically, because European founders are used to pitching to European VCs, which generally have a hard time seeing ambition as like investable. And then he asked them, okay, where are you in 3 years? Why are you not there in 3 months? And I think that's a question you can always ask yourself too. I think it originates with Thiel, apropos, though though I think he's gone into conspiracy theories recently. But
Yep, I think that is always a very good question to ask yourself. Is like, why can't I achieve my 10-year plan like this month?
yeah, indeed. All right, thank you so much, Rudolf. Do you have maybe a last word to what people can get out of the hackathon, or what they should think about, or?
Well, I think I'd go like maybe like the one theme here is just like I think I encourage you to be like contrarian and ambitious in like what ideas you're thinking about, and try to like find like something that is like both specific and contrarian and like concrete, and like then work on that.
Nice, perfect. Thank you so much, Rudolf. Everyone,
Great.
give him a round
Thanks.
of applause. Perfect.
Thank you everyone for listening.